Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari.
And I'm Garret Schellenhammer.
And before we get into what movie we're going to overanalyze today, we have a couple of Movies That Matter announcements. The first announcement is great news. We are having a meet and greet. If you are in the DC area, please come to District Chop House for happy hour on June 13th and meet the team. As far as I know, most of us are going to be there, so come talk movies and social issues with us. Second of all, we are migrating our web host, so our website's going to look a little different in a couple weeks, but nothing should affect the episodes or any of the player issues. So stay tuned for that. Okay, what movie are we overanalyzing this week?
Rocketman.
Yes. So young Reginald Dwight, played by a couple of different actors, changes his name to Elton John, played by Egerton, and collaborates with singer-songwriter Bernie Taupin, played by Jamie Bell, to become one of the most iconic figures in pop history. Set to his most beloved songs, it's the epic musical story of Elton John, his breakthrough years in the 70s, and his fantastical transformation from shy piano prodigy to international superstar. What did you think?
I loved it.
Did you?
I think you knew I was going to love it, though. I went to it expecting more of a biopic, but fell in love with how much of a musical it was.
Yes. So I also liked it, and there was a part of me that was just like, I kind of wish I weren't doing this for the podcast because I really just want to lose myself in the musical aspect of it and not have to keep my analytical brain awake while watching it. I had just seen Aladdin, which I thought could possibly be good. And it was terrible because Guy Ritchie does not know how to film a musical. It was wretched. And he let Will Smith sing, which he never should have done because Will Smith couldn't carry off the big songs, which I didn't know this. I looked it up. A guy named Bruce Adler did fill-in vocals for Robin Williams because Robin Williams couldn't hit those, the high notes of Prince Ali.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoever did the music mixing on that, it's seamless. You absolutely cannot tell that it's not Robin Williams singing, right?
Okay.
If you've seen the original. So I was like, why didn't they just Anyway, I don't want to get into a separate review of Aladdin, but I was just like, this movie stunk. This guy doesn't know how to make a movie musical. And then I came into Rocketman and I was like, yes, a movie musical! Old-fashioned sets, choreographed dancing. I'm so in. I'm so for it.
This reminded me very much if you've ever seen Across the Universe.
I haven't.
It's the
Beatles one, right?
Mm-hmm, done in the same style, and I would highly recommend it. Little different than the Bohemian Rhapsody feel, because I feel like this was more of a musical than a biopic that just sang the songs of Queen. This was more integrating his music into the movie and the plot in a seamless manner with dance numbers, acting while singing, stories were taking place while songs were going on. So I really enjoyed that about this. And I don't know, I was just blown away by how well it was done. And even the setup of the plot and how he's telling the whole story the whole time himself. It was just, I thought it was shot really well. I have very, very few complaints about this movie, which is good because every now and then we need a good movie to remind us why we go, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think the two big things for me about this and Bohemian Rhapsody, so I will say that I'm much more of a Queen fan than I am an Elton John fan. I'm certainly no expert on either, but from my big complaint about Bohemian Rhapsody is that nothing about Rami Malek captured the performance of Freddie Mercury.
No.
He just looked like a skinny little kid up there, whereas Freddie Mercury had this incredible, masculine sexuality that he, exuded on stage, and then there was none of that. Whereas I would say for this one, again, not an expert on Elton John, but I really felt Elton John in the performances. It really felt like him. I felt like Taron Egerton captured his energy and his, performance persona really well on screen. And apparently Elton John and his partner felt the same way. I read an article that I'll post where they talked about making the movie, and they had a still of Taron Egerton on one of the planes, and Elton John was like, I don't even remember taking that picture. And his partner was like, yeah, that's not you. That's Taron Egerton.
Yeah, no, I thought Taron Egerton, like, there was parts of the movie I was like, you can definitely tell it's Taron Egerton. But other times I'd turn around like, wow, that really looked like Elton John from back in the day. I was reading up on Taron Egerton, and he actually gained weight for the part. He, like, not just, like, he went above, I feel like, kind of the call of what he wanted. He wanted to be so good, so he would, like, countless hours, like, look at pictures of Elton John, and then look at the photo mock-ups for, he'd be like, no, I mean, my ascot to be, like, a different shade of blue or whatever. And so, like, he really got into this role. But you can tell, I would be very surprised if he's not nominated for...
He was excellent.
...some sort of award for this, Best Actor. But, like, it was an emotion. Like, he made me feel so emotional with the story of Elton John going through this. And, you know, we usually only see him in kind of, like, comedic, funny roles where he's serious but charming at the same time. And we were there through the ups and downs with him, and it felt incredible to just be there in the theater. I saw it yesterday, first month of Pride. Happy Pride, everybody. And it just was like a surreal experience to sit there and watch a journey from a man struggle with his own identity and sexuality to become one of the world's greatest leading rock stars.
Yeah, I thought everybody did a good job. And I thought I liked how they didn't pull their punches either on Elton John. Like, a lot of the complaint about Bohemian Rhapsody was they kind of sanitized it. No. And this, you know...
It was real.
Yeah, it was very real. And it was very much... Especially as you, like, see Elton through the eyes of Bernie, his best friend, and, you know, his lifelong collaborator for all of his songs. Like, you kind of see, like, okay, sure, Elton John did have a really difficult childhood. But, like, he's also a petulant child and an addict a lot of times. And it's really annoying. Yeah. And it really makes you not like him and not root for him sometimes. And you kind of see that... with all his scenes with Bernie, and I really love that he didn't pretend that, like, being an addict is, like, you know, he kind of shows all this sort of downsides of what it's like to have to be friends with a junkie. Like, yeah. So I really appreciated, like, that he was willing to sort of put himself out there as to, like, what he was really like and how just sort of petulant and childish he could be sometimes, and demanding everybody love him. And I like that the movie actually acknowledges that. Yeah. Too. It's not just like you see it. There's Elton's fully, like, when he's out in rehab and getting healthy, he's, like, making some apologies to his best friend Bernie. And he's like, I know I did never have a chance. I went from being a child, and I continued to be a child. I never stopped. I got my way, and I did what I wanted. And it's so interesting because I think he was so repressed in his childhood. He was very structured in his childhood, wasn't much affection. So he was always trying to find the next bigger thing. And then when he found something, he just found that was his nurture and did never grow through that. Right. And I did think that he and Jamie Bell had really good chemistry, and, like, their scenes to me, like, were probably my favorite of the whole movie together. Like, I thought the casting was really well done. I didn't love her character because she was just terrible. His mother is played by Bryce Dallas Howard, doing a passable English accent. Yeah, good for her, and phenomenal. Like, she did a phenomenal job. But his mother, in this character, is not warm. I don't know if unloving is the right word. It's just not caring. She was she felt like she was above having a child, and she didn't want a child, and he was a burden and everything like that. And it was hard to kind of stomach some of those scenes where his mom is like, you know, I never wanted you, you know, you're an embarrassment to me. Just give me money, make me go away, like, da-da-da-da-da. But then to see that contrast between his grandmother, who fostered amazing, like, she was the one who really, like,
was like, you should do piano lessons, you should go for this scholarship, I'll support you no matter what. And kind of some of the scenes where Elton's just like developing songs on a piano and the grandmother just sits down in awe and watches him work. And I was really moved by that because I felt like those are tangible emotions you could feel.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you often get in like I don't know. I just felt like the casting was really well done. And I didn't feel like I was being faked. I know we've talked about sometimes where actors, like, I didn't see them in that role or that I didn't feel that emotion. But here I pretty much matched emotion for emotion with everyone. And it wasn't due to anything other than, like, I think they really nailed the acting. I'm sure they had to do those scenes several times.
Yeah.
But they really nailed it in this one.
Yeah, I agree. And also, like, from some of the cinematic elements, too, one of the things I really appreciated about this movie there was a ton of very strategic use of light and color. So, my favorite part, like, first of all, just the opening shot, the bright white, and he's coming through in his bright sort of orange costume. And then they go back to his childhood and everybody's kind of grayed out except for him and his like childhood self. But there's the song where, like, the whole family is singing in different parts of the house and everyone's being kind of hit by a different light to sort of demonstrate like their isolation and their loneliness, even though they're all together in this house. And you can sort of, like, when the dad's singing, you can see, young Elton John, young Reggie Dwight in the scene, but he's like backlit and the father's like frontlit. Like, there was a lot of stuff they did with light and color, which I really appreciated on a cinematic level. And I was like, good for you. Like,
and even when like he was doing his performances, I really enjoyed how light came into play. Like, you could tell Elton John was becoming elevated within himself.
Yeah.
And the light started radiating from around him. And it was a really nice, like, kind of like example of what he was feeling.
Right.
And using light in that way. I agree. I thought it was shot absolutely brilliant. The way there's so many colors, there's so many movements in this movie, and it didn't make me feel blurry or sick or anything like that. It was done so well and so iconic. But they didn't try to like filter it either, It was more raw, like trying to be more of a actual, I think, documentary type style where the footage is a little bit more raw. And you see him come out in these costumes and they're not super polished and they are bright and eccentric, but not always like, are they like, oh my God, do they have to be like absolutely perfect? They were just really well done. I felt like I would recommend anybody seeing this twice. Once to just kind of get the plot and understand, and second to go back and watch all like the amazing cinematography and just kind of the use of music and the interludes of music, which I thought was really nice too, connecting a lot of his songs with other songs, but just in the background or a little ditty and a hum, somebody on the street, which was nice.
Yeah. And there was another article I read, which I will post, about the scene of the transition from him trying to commit suicide, falling into the pool, and then 2 days later doing the concert at Dodger Stadium. So it's like you go through this like sort of dreamlike montage of him in the pool through to getting his stomach pumped, through to going to the costume change, and then like you see him turn it on and like become Elton John and walk out on stage. Oh. And just the whole choreography and the camera keeping him in silhouette and then moving into like full color, like just was really, really, really well done. And it was just a joy to watch. Like, everybody looked like they enjoyed what they were doing, whereas like Aladdin really did look like the soulless cash grab that it was, like there was no life behind any of it.
But I agree with your assessment when he's performing at Dodger Stadium. I thought the exact same thing about when he's playing Benny and the Jets, which is written about his friend leaving to go off and not songwrite with him for a little bit. And there's this beautiful montage where Elton is discovering like drugs and sex at a club, and like he's singing Benny and the Jets, but it's like this amazing choreographed dance with this whole club that he's at, and then there's passing him over like he's waving on a crowd surfing, And just the hands and the touching and just the energy you can draining from Elton in these things. And it's the metaphor for the drugs that's draining him and the sex that's draining him and the party and the rock and roll. While he's at the same time playing the piano about Benny and the Jets, like talking about everything he's lost, when it's actually more deeper meaning of wanting to be attached to something.
Yeah. They did a lot with the choreography and the visual metaphor, which I very much appreciated. And then some of it they just played straight as a musical, and they had dance scenes, which I love. And so to that end, the only thing that I was disappointed in was like, we had Billy Elliot in a movie and he never danced. I was like, come on, people. Does he just not dance anymore? Jamie Bell, cut me some slack here. Like, I kept expecting a dance scene to happen and it never did.
Yeah.
Although Taron Egerton was a good dancer.
I was pleasantly surprised. Did all of his own dancing, choreography, everything. And you could just feel the difference from, like, the start of his career when he got into rock and roll from his mother's boyfriend at the time. And really kind of started to progress. And so you can tell he's all full of energy and everything. And then he goes to America to perform for the first time. And he's got this great energy as well. But it's the real struggle. I really enjoyed that scene where he's like, oh my gosh, this is the Beach Boys are here. Neil Diamond is at the bar talking. And you see like Elton John be like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not, these are the greatest musical voices of the time here in this bar. I can't go out and sing. And I just think it was really funny because, you know, they like banging on the door like, Elton, you gotta come. And all it took was to be like, you know, call him a dirty name and like insult him, be like, don't be weak, you know, come on and do this. And like, don't be a twat. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then you just see Elton get up and just like, well, let's go. Let's do it. Like, it was so well done. There's not a lot of comedy in it because, again, the whole story is being told about him and how he became who he is today, but struggling with his sexuality, struggling with drugs, struggling with corruption in his manager and stuff like that. And it's just kind of, but the whole setup is Elton checks into rehab the very first minute of the movie, walks in a full costume. Yeah. And then it checks back in where he's telling his story the whole time until the end of the movie where he's like getting better and out of rehab, and he ends writing a song in rehab. Right.
And he starts like in this, you know, in this big sort of orange devil suit thing. And as like the movie progresses, whenever they check back in, he starts shedding more and more of the costume until he's down to like basically like a tracksuit. Like you see him sort of decoupling and learning to take off all the performance wear and find, you know, like the real person within, which I thought was, again, a really nice visual metaphor for the movie. Like, I wouldn't say it was the most subtle of movies. Right. Some of the lines were a little bit too on the nose and a little bit like, I don't think people really talk like that. But, you know, so I wouldn't say it was like a perfect movie, but just sit back and enjoy the ride. It doesn't have to be perfect. I will say one thing, too, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. So before we started recording, you had said that you'd seen it, the theater had a breakdown, and so you didn't see a digital version.
Correct.
So there were two places, and this was a really interesting way to do this. There were two places where they mixed in, like, original footage. One in particular was the I'm Still Standing video.
Oh, yeah.
It looked kind of janky on the digital screen.
Oh, I mean, I can see where I can definitely
like you
see.
Could film blowing it up and comparing it to how things are shot digitally. Like, it didn't look as crisp. Like, you could see it. The lines were showing.
Right.
Seams were showing, I guess I should say.
Yeah, no, I to me, because I saw it on actual film, kind of like grainy cut anyway. So, like, you know, that really nice, like, so... Yeah, I think you're right that probably seeing it in film, I didn't notice it as much. You could definitely tell, like, somebody should have just colored a little bit better and filtered just a little bit more and been like, that there's a little bit off. But no, I thought that was a unique I'm Still Standing kind of playing his original and then cutting back to the thing. But I didn't notice as much of a problem with it.
I wouldn't think so.
I would say in film, though, one of the best things that you probably would have not got extremely digital is when he's playing Pinball Wizard and he's spinning around, and it's not a blur, but it's like a continuation of each costume to each costume to each costume. I feel like in a digital, I would have been like, I could probably see the transitions really hard.
I had to close my eyes.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good scene, but I get motion sick really easy from that kind of stuff. So like, I was like, I'm here, I'm closing my eyes. I'm going to get sick. Like,
versus that kind of like film transition where it's like, it's going from here to here to here.
Yeah.
And so it kind of looks like it was meant to be shot that way, but I'm not sure how it would look in digital. I hadn't thought about that, but I did notice when I was seeing it, I was like, oh God, this is amazing in film. But I didn't think about how to have been shot in digital.
Yeah. Again, it was an interesting choice. I could see the lines, and I'm not sure if that's a bad thing or worth sort of, rather than doing like this whole like
just recreate
weird
the video.
Recreation, which everybody praised Bohemian Rhapsody for, and I was like, yeah, but then you sort of got yourself into the position where everybody on YouTube was making a side-by-side cut of what was in the movie and what it looked like when Freddie Mercury was doing it.
Yeah.
And then pointing out all the flaws. Like, I don't know if you want to open yourself up to that. Like,
right. No, and it was an interesting way to end the movie.
Yeah.
Because I thought we would end with him. I really thought we were going to get more from Your Song out of Your Song, one of Elton John's #1 hits. I really thought we were going to get more play out of it because we only got it just a little bit while he was writing it, basically, while he was writing the music to it. And I really thought we would come back to that at the end of the movie when his Benny comes back, his best friend, to see him in rehab and say, hey, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere.
But I'm still not going to put up with your bullshit.
Yeah, like, I'm not going to...
I love that about him. He's like, I'm here, I'm your friend. But every time, like, Elton's like, you didn't do this, and you need to... Like Bernie holds his boundaries really well. Like, I guess that's part of, like... I have a friend in a unfortunately, startingly similar situation to Reginald Dwight, who had, like, an absent father, a withholding mother, and then the only positive influence in his life was his grandmother. And so it's like, I kind of relate to that, seeing somebody go through that. So it's like, I just love Bernie as, like, how well Bernie manages to just navigate Elton's dysfunction and still be his friend, but still maintain his own sort of sanity.
Yeah, I thought it was really... I enjoyed that this whole movie was not necessarily... And don't take this wrong way, because I want it. I was glad we weren't just... The whole thing was only about his sexuality. I think you can't not tell the Elton John story without talking about his sexuality, which it does quite well, don't get me wrong. But I was afraid walking into it, it would... Coming out during Pride Month, it would be only about his sexuality and what he went through. But this was a very well-rounded story about the struggles he had with just wanting to feel attached and loved. Not like by men necessarily, but by his mother, his father, anybody. And that the first person he ever actually fell in love with was kind of out to screw him over and he became his manager and took advantage of him. And then it shows this tragic part where Elton married a woman to try to be happy, and then put this woman through a lot of grief because he couldn't fulfill her
romantic needs.
Any needs, yeah.
Probably any needs if he was still using at that point. That's a good point.
So it just like was a really nice, well-rounded story that kind of showed me more about like how he was struggling with the rock and roll. And it wasn't also, I like that we didn't shy away from, I think we talked about this a little earlier, but we didn't shy away from drugs. We weren't like, oh my gosh, let me do drugs in secret. Like, no, this was the 70s. People were doing drugs very hard, different places. Nobody really questioned him doing drugs. It was kind of like expected, and they loved his craziness and the outgoingness. And I think everybody probably knew that he was getting most of that from drugs. But just really watching him in the rehab scenes, I quite thoroughly enjoyed because it was a very sobering experience, no pun intended, to kind of just be like, he's very human and having to go through these very natural human reactions and finally wanting to stop. He checked himself into rehab. I don't know if you want to actually look at the real story, but he checked himself into rehab and was like, I got to stop. I can't keep doing this or else I'm going to burn out again. I can't keep fighting everybody in my life. And decided to check himself into rehab and has been reportedly sober for 28 years now. So like unbelievable willpower, but he also had to have gotten so low. And that's what like the movie kind of touches on is he was so miserable. He's like, I can't even be happy with drugs anymore. I'm miserable with drugs. I'm miserable without. So why not try to live a better life and start forgiving people?
Yeah. So, it was interesting. I was out with Stacy last weekend, and we were having a conversation a little bit about mental illness and addiction and those kinds of issues. And she said something that I thought, I was like, this sort of perfectly encapsulates this movie. Now, you can tell me from sort of a professional point of view, I don't entirely agree with her statement. I think it goes a little bit too far. But she made the statement that depression and anxiety are about not being able to feel your feelings.
I don't know if I agree with that 100%. I think I can understand where she's coming from.
Yeah.
But
that's kind of how I felt. And
yeah.
It's like, and like his whole recovery process is like, you've got to excavate all of the stuff you've been trying to avoid, the hurt and the pain of your childhood, your misunderstanding of, not misunderstanding isn't the right word, but like how you dealt with the fame and the success. Like you've got to like look it all in the face, forgive those people, forgive yourself. I think, there was there's an honest truth about like him looking at his younger self and giving him a hug. And then that's sort of the resolution of this whole process to recovery. And just be like, you've been trying to avoid dealing with all your stuff and you've been masking it with drugs. And now you gotta kind of sit in a room and face it all before you can get better.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to theories of child development about attachment. And there are 4 different kinds of attachment. And 1 is secure, 3 are insecure. And of one of the insecures, it's avoidant. So it's usually from children who did not get comfort as a child. And so don't look for comfort as adults. And don't usually emotionally develop quite as quickly or as fully as most people who have a secure attachment. Cognitively, this is, which would also mean emotionally, everybody. I thought it was interesting that he kind of had to grow up. He finally had to stop wanting to be a child and let go of the idea of like, I was treated very poorly as a child. And he was letting that avoidant attachment where he was avoiding relationships, self-sabotaging relationships he had, looking for love in the wrong places, which we would say drugs, and then in rock and roll. He didn't want to be famous growing up. And I think that's what an interesting point to this is he wasn't looking to be the biggest person. He wasn't looking to be the biggest star. He wasn't looking for all that. He started off as a classical piano player and then just was a child prodigy in music. But then played backup for soul music for a long time and then kind of wanted to start his own stuff, but didn't want to be a singer, didn't want to, he said himself, I don't have the best voice, I just kind of want to be back here doing the music. And kind of was thrust into a role where he had to grow up so fast. But if you're not ready for that and you can't do that, then you're going to struggle. And I thought it was just a great, well-rounded about like how finally he's just like, I've got to accept the things I can't change. Mm-hmm. And I have to get better from here because it's literally hurting everyone else, but it's hurting me even more. And it was just a beautifully well done, like walking out of his own concert to be like, I'm leaving my lifestyle if it means I can have just a shred of happiness and I will get myself clean and sober.
Right. And I think you talk about the importance of family, but for a lot of us, and it comes through so strongly in the movie, like he has chosen family. He's just not willing to acknowledge it for a long time. Like, but Bernie's always there for him. And it's like and they call each other brother. And you're like, you can, if your blood family isn't who you need them to be as a stable influence. Like, a lot of us go out into the world and find a chosen family to be those people. And you see him sort of like fall into a situation where he gets to recreate a stable influence in his life that he then needs to draw upon as things go to hell. And I thought that was really nice that you sort of see, like, you know, he spends his whole life looking for romantic love and sort of takes the platonic love that is such a stabilizing influence for him for granted for a long time.
Right. And it's really well done in the movie too. I think that, I mean, I know you kind of hear the heaviness in both of our voices, but like the movie does a good job of inducing that and inciting that in people, but it also like shows you in the movie, like you can feel it, it's tangible, it creates feelings in you, and you also just kind of get this real sense of like, Elton John really did struggle, but Elton John at some point decided not to struggle anymore and decided to get help and love the people who were around him who wanted to support him and to get his body into better shape and his mind back into working shape.
Yeah.
And it was just really, really powerful for a movie that how much energy and excitement. We've talked about how much of a musical it was. Like,
yeah.
It was really well done, and I think it'll be a while before we have another movie like this again.
Yeah. So there was one other thing that I wanted to like sort of explore with you. So I found it interesting, and we talked about this. I went and saw it with a friend, and we talked about this line. So when he finally comes out to his mother, again, the mother is kind of this like, she gives with one hand and then like gutsy with the other, like, which is very well done. But so in the movie, and I guess, was this the 80s? Were we already into the 80s when he does that? So he tells her that he's gay, and of course she's like, I already know that.
I've known for years.
Yeah, and he's, you know, he has that moment of relief when it's like, oh, this isn't going to be a big deal. And then she goes, I'm just sorry for you because you're never going to find anybody to love you. And you'll be alone forever.
You'll never have normal love. And yeah, it was just really heart-wrenching because you're like, this is this woman's character. Like, it
was that woman's character? But so then we were talking about it, and I was like, well, it was a terrible thing to say regardless. But I'm like, how much of that really was untrue for the context of the times? Do you know what I mean? Like, he could not have predicted, I don't think any of us could have predicted that in his lifetime, he was going to marry a man and have kids. Like, at that stage of where we were with, like, queer rights, like, I just don't think anybody saw that coming as quickly as it did shape. And so I'm like, there's sort of an element of truth there where, you know, at that time, being gay did mean you were probably never going to have a relationship that was going to be considered on par with anybody else's. Not that he couldn't find love. Of course he could. Like, gay people found love for all time. Like,
and it was, I mean, Elton John had the, I would say, benefit, privilege of being American-based, too, where it was a little bit, especially California in the 80s, you know, it was more accepted to be gay than it was in Britain at that time. Mm-hmm. And not that there are not gay people all over the world at the same rates. That's not what I'm saying. But he had the opportunity to kind of like experience probably more than he would have had he just been a rock and roll star in Britain. And you look and you're like, man, would have he been different? Like, would he have continued to marry women? Would he have had children and been unhappy, trying to like find love in different ways? And who knows? Because of the way it did happen and the way that I think he was getting to live a double life. He got to be more free and open and queer friendly. But I mean, it's just like everyone kind of was like, oh, well, we all know Liberace was gay, but we didn't want to talk about it. Like, I think everyone knew, like, Elton John was probably queer, homosexual, gay, whatever you want to use. But, like, it wasn't talked about because that wasn't the thing that people thought about. We've come so far and yet so different because during this time of rock and roll, it was the music. people cared about that music and these performances, and everybody will never get performances in our day like they had back then. One, a lot because it was drugs induced, and two, it was just like a different time. We didn't have to worry about audio speaker here and how well it sounds in the very corner of a room packed, and like you played for the crowd and the crowd played back. And so he got to like go on this unique experience journey that if this had been happening today, I don't know that it would have been as rich or as impactful if Elton's story had happened today.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they didn't shy away from him being gay and that being an issue for him, but I felt like they also just didn't hammer it, which I kind of appreciated. Like, this whole movie wasn't about how, like, his struggle to be openly gay. And like you said, there seemed to be a lot of spaces where he was out and where people kind of knew and were fine with it, probably being in, in LA and in the music scene. And I thought that line, like in one sense you can take it as like his terrible mother, but in another sense it was like that was a reality to a certain extent that a lot of people thought that they were facing at that time, and like it was cruel of her to kind of put it that way, but it also like I was glad it was in there because it was also like something that was real for a lot of people. Like, it's one thing. I mean, there was a reason the whole, gay marriage fight happened, was because it's one thing to say that I'm with this person and I love this person. And there is an aspect of saying like, but I want to be public with that. And I want it to be acknowledged the same way everybody else's relationships are. Like, it isn't just enough to find the person. Mm-hmm. You really do want to be able to like have your relationship count in the eyes of everybody else.
I agree.
Huh. We got the heavy and the light there.
Yeah.
Which kind of like encapsulates the movie pretty well.
If you've been with us on this journey, we started off really fun and exciting and kind of got into some really good content today.
Yeah, so wrapping it all up, social impact score.
6.5. How about you?
Yeah, really similar. I was going to give it a 7.
Yeah, it hits on a lot of good points about like rock and roll culture, drugs, sex, but also lots of good stuff about, accepting who you are, sexual identity issues. I really felt like it's got some good content. I don't know if it's got one specific issue that hammers more than any other, but like it's got quite a bit of social impact change, and especially coming out on Pride Month. Yeah. Really releasing that. Yeah.
Well, and I'm like, so, this is a storyline I watch is like a sloppy drunk or a dirty addict. Like, I don't like junkie stories. Like, they're not for me. This is a story about somebody in recovery and getting help and having it be successful. And that's a difficult road for people to help, to walk, I should say. But I'm just like, yes, submit, ask for help, recognize that you need it. Like, that's a positive message, and it actually doesn't get told as much in movies as I frankly think it should.
I agree.
Also, apparently, I don't know if you saw this, like, Russia cut the sex scene.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so it put a pretty steamy, male scene on screen. There's been a lot of chatter about whether it was enough or whatever. I was like, hey, 2 men were getting it on. It was great. Like,
you got to see Richard Madden and Taron Egerton go at it, and as gay lovers, and everybody in the theater I was with was all homosexuals, and they were all like, "Ooh!" So it was quite the steamy scene,
and it was really nice to see just sort of like a hot scene between 2 guys in a mainstream film. Like, so it gets points for that. Alrighty, recommendations for the week.
Only 2 recommendations.
Okay. Keep them low.
I want you to actually read his book. He's got several books, but I want you to read Me.
Okay.
You can find it online, Barnes & Noble, Target, Amazon, whatever. Elton John wrote it, and it's got some unique anecdote stories in it that you don't get in a lot of his other biographies and stuff like that. So he'll have just like random interactions with famous people or people on the street, like just hearing lyrics and kind of his creative process of like being on the street and walking past a cafe in Britain one time, and then he like heard the sound of like the teapot going and heard a melody in his head all of a sudden. Like, it's just kind of like little anecdotes from his life, which I really enjoy. And then the second one I want to recommend is to kind of tell more stories about pride and sexuality as we come up on the Stonewall riots. I want you to watch on Netflix The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson, who was the first person to throw a brick in the Stonewall riots. And it has a lot to do with understanding kind of sexuality. You know, she was a trans woman of color, and she's really the one who started the Stonewall riot. And as we're here at the 50th anniversary and World Pride is going to be celebrated, and ABC for the first time in history is going to televise the World Pride Parade, like, it's a big deal. And so I think really kind of understanding that time period with Elton John too is going to help quite a bit, because it's going to show more of like what the struggle was like for people and their rights. Yeah, and I think I'm glad you mentioned that, and I think it's really important too, because there was a movie that came out about Stonewall, and I'm blanking on the director's name, and he sanitizes isn't the right word, but he just like took out all the trans people and the people of color from the story, and people were really angry because it was like, hey, this was like New York City. This is not this like lily white place. Like, that's not what this was about. And the film portrayal. So like, yeah, see what Stonewall was all about. My recommendation for the week, you segued to it really nicely, is if you haven't seen A Very British Scandal on Netflix with Hugh Grant, he is a gay MP, member of parliament, and it's a very silly and yet actually true story. I don't want to spoil it, but him being gay and the fact that that's illegal and, a crime at the time very much plays into like him making a series of very poor decisions. Yeah. So like, it has the same, like, some of it is played a little bit for comedy, but it's a really good look back at like what it was like to be in fear for your life. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave us a review on iTunes if you like us. Check out our website. It's not going to change. We're still going to be at moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. It's just going to look different. I'm keeping the domain name. We'll have all the links to the things we discussed in our show notes. Leave a comment on our Facebook page. Also check our Facebook page. We'll have it at the event for the happy hour, which you should definitely come to and come and talk to us. We'll also be on Twitter with our tag @MoviesMatterPod. And we'll let you know what movie we are overanalyzing next. We have a really great summer season coming up. I'm very excited. Yeah. Usually I'm dreading summer blockbuster season, and we have all kinds of fun things that we're going to watch. All right. And remember, movies matter. And so do you. See you next time.